Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of ATTMind Radio. I'm your host, as always, Jesso, and this podcast is releasing on the new moon of April 2017. Just going to start off with a couple 5-star reviews that I got recently on iTunes. From Hesperus in the USA says, an interesting and diverse look into the human psyche. And The Wave from Canada says, breakthrough material, stunningly self-reflective and relevant at the right time. This podcast helped me unearth and identify trauma in my own life and motivated me to take steps forward immediately into working toward resolution. I believe that is a reference to episode with Mark Wolin when we talked about inherited family trauma. So to both of you two listeners, thanks so much for leaving these reviews. I love getting reviews. I mean, it makes me feel like I'm doing something good in this world, and I get feedback on what people are liking. So if you are listening to the show and there's something that you like, I would really appreciate you sending me up a review. It helps me align towards what you as a listening audience likes, and you get to have it read on the show. Speaking of liking the content of the show, this episode here with Sander Bos is a bit of a deviation from sort of the primary themes that have been emerging in the show over the last little while, but it still intersects with the basic central theme, which is psychedelic and psychedelic culture. What makes it slightly different is that it's about art and the artistic process. Specifically, as you've probably noticed from the title, it's about where visionary art can evolve to as it enters into virtual reality as a medium. I personally enjoyed my conversation with Sander. He's a very interesting man and a cool head on his shoulders for moving forward with his art. But what do you think? Do you like this content? Is it a good direction to go? Should I keep having conversations about art? You can hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's all at James W. Jesso. I want to hear your feedback. This is not one directional. I want to help this podcast grow with you, by you, for you, and through you. So your feedback is really appreciated. Another couple interesting comments about the upcoming show today is that, well, Sander's first language is not English, so it gets a little slow at first, but it starts to pick up as the podcast moves along. Also, you'll hear about halfway through the interview that I mentioned I'd like to retrofit videos of Sander's visionary art virtual reality. You're going to get to see those videos before I actually mention I'm going to retrofit them. So if you're watching this on YouTube and you hear that I mention visionary virtual reality, take a look at your screen if you're just having it playing around in the house while you're walking around, and see this like really cool psychedelic architecture that Sander builds into three-dimensional environments for the Oculus Rift. Finally, I would like to drop some thank yous. Tyson, Lynn, and the Lovolution Authentic Dance Community in Victoria have recently left one-time PayPal donations, and I really appreciate that, so thank you so much. I would also like to thank Melanie, Thomas, Carl, Wes, and Greg for being patrons at the top level of support. Thank you guys so much. This podcast is brought to you by listeners like you. All those names that you heard are listeners like you helping to bring this podcast into not only increasing quality and availability, but also increasing investment on my part that I can really put in to help make this podcast great for you. For example, you might notice that this episode, if you're listening to it on one of your streaming services, loaded way faster than any other time you've listened to an episode. That's because we have upgraded to a new podcast hosting service, which is enabling much faster accessibility for everyone listening. So big thanks to all of my patrons and other supporters of the show for helping make this possible. Right now, until the end of April, which is pretty soon if you're just listening to this episode, there is an opportunity to support the show in its spring fundraising campaign. And in doing so, if you become a patron at $4 or more, you will get your name or pseudonym included in a promotional art card that is being designed with the new logo or mascot for the podcast that has been designed by visionary artist Eduardo Kine. The growth and expanse of this podcast, as well as my ability to continue to invest, feel enthusiastic, valued, and actually be funded in order to keep doing this, is influenced by the donations and patronage that is coming through from you, the listeners. So if you aren't already a patron, please take a moment to head over to jameswjesso.com/support and check me out on Patreon and consider funding the show with your couple extra dollars a month. So that's it for now. Please enjoy the April 2017 New Moon episode of ATTMind Radio with visionary artist Sander Bos. Today on the show, we have Sander Bos. He is a Dutch multimedia artist. His interests vary from painting with oils to 3D animation and virtual reality environments. His work is heavily influenced by the visionary experience and takes form in crystalline architecture, glowing symbols, and swirling astral dimensions of light and beauty. Besides painting, Bose is also working with new media like smartphone apps and the Oculus Rift to create virtual reality environments and powerful, immersive 3D animated journeys. Australium, is that how you say it? Australium?
Australium, yeah.
Australium is one of his virtual reality projects, which we'll talk about later in the interview. It is the first steps towards a virtual healing space where people can connect, create, and share in new ways by exploring the possibilities of this new artistic medium. Welcome to the show, Sander.
Thanks, James.
So we met briefly, as we were just confirming before, at the Sci-Fi Festival in Netherlands. And you mentioned what you did, and I was like, oh yeah, send me an email. We can talk about it. And I was pretty excited when I actually looked at your stuff, and I was like, okay, yeah, I meet some people. They're like, oh yeah, I'm an artist, blah, blah, blah. And then I went on to your page and I saw these incredible paintings. And then I started watching the videos for your VR environments and like, whoa, this guy's legit.
Cool. Well, that's good to hear, man. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So, I watched one of your YouTube videos, like a lecture that you gave, which I think was called "The Mission of Art is Exploring Consciousness," or is that something that you said in there? And you talked about sort of your perspective on all art as something that occasions altered states of consciousness in people, and you paralleled the nature of art to something very similar to shamanism. At least it can have that possibility. I'm curious if you could talk about your story and how you came into your art now with this paradigm and what that connection to shamanism looked like for you.
Well, yeah. Well, it kind of started with, I was really into painting not at a very young age, but I was finishing school and I didn't really know what to do with my life. And then I just started this 1 year in between. And there I discovered that I just really need to express myself creatively. And at first I was very interested in dreams and also by the surrealist. I was a big fan of Dali. And I was like, I really want to paint like that, I want to paint those dreamy landscapes. So then I was really studying drawing, and went to art school. And that also introduced me to visionary states. I was my first experience with mushrooms with a friend during art school, and there was really overwhelmed by the experience, like, because it was a very visual experience for me, and I was really working visually as an artist. So that kind of transformed my art from the surrealism into a kind of visionary dimension, so to say. So that was kind of the tilting point. And it also became really interested in working digitally. So during art school as well. And that also started my interest in shamanism, because there's this whole tradition of working with those visionary plants. And so I became really interested in that and reading a lot about that, and writing parts of my thesis about that as well. And the shaman is, of course, also the first artist. So that kind of gave me a little bit of perspective of that I'm continuing that tradition. And we might not have a shaman as a cultural figure really present in our society now. But I think that the artist is the most close to that person. So, yeah.
Can you talk about, so you say that the mission of art and shamanism are similar, which is to alter and explore consciousness. Beyond visual representation of, say, altered states or visionary states, what do you believe your art or art in general can offer to people who are participating as witnesses to the artistic process, or maybe the artistic, like the artifacts at the end of the artistic and creative process, in regards to altering consciousness and what the possible benefits of that could be?
You mean for artists or just for people experiencing the art?
Both.
Both.
Either okay. Or, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think art can, or experiences of art can lead to a transcending experience. So, and that can lead to subtle changes in consciousness. So in the way you are perceiving reality, so to say. For example, we have a very symbolic, created a very symbolic society, because you are bombarded with images all the time through TV, through several media, and that also has implications in our consciousness and in what choices we make in life. And what is very important, I think, is the intention of the maker of these symbols. So if it's a commercial, then an image out of a commercial, then it's based on commercial profit. And what an artist is doing, he is not creating art out of a commercial profit. He is making art out of other things, out of love, or out of an experience of life that is meaningful to him. and also healing for him. And I think that's a big difference, that an artwork can have healing, and a healing experience. And I think that's something that I want to portray in my art as well. So
now, you mentioned earlier that after you had mushrooms, which has offered you a whole new visual aesthetic for seeing the world and got you interested in things like shamanism, do you feel like your creative process changed on like an experiential level after you had psychedelics for the first time?
My experiential approach,
as in the experience of your creative process before psychedelics and then after psychedelics, do you feel like there was a noticeable change in what it was like for you to be in the creative state of consciousness?
Yeah, definitely, because it really was a catalyzer of expressions of creativity for me, because it opened this whole new doorway of new worlds that I could create. But in the beginning, I found it very difficult because those experiences were so complex and complicated that I found myself not able to depict them in that way that I was experiencing them. And so the difficult part is translating it into a visual medium. So I think that's where the technique comes into importance. And I realized that the more technical ability I had, the closer I became to translating the visual complexity of the experience.
Mm-hmm. Your paintings, as I've only seen online, definitely feel like, in looking at them, that if I were, like, they're awesome to look at from the internet, like, wow, that's really cool, but I could only imagine, especially with the size of them, they're all quite big, as to what it would be like to walk into a room that has these huge, beautiful paintings. And I'm reflecting on the some of the discussions about altered states of consciousness that was present in Aldous Huxley's follow-up essay to The Doors of Perception, Heaven and Hell, and him talking about the progression of art as a means for altering consciousness. And architecture is one of those things, like walking into an old cathedral, and the very like shape of it like brings your head and your body up into this like awing position, and it would create this type of sensation in the body of being like looking upwards to something grand and beautiful. And I definitely see this as a possibility in sort of being directly present to your paintings, because of just like the massive, I don't really necessarily have the language, but just the beauty that they create. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because you're saying that you engage in the artistic process as like a healing process, and a healing process to offer to others, that the participation in bearing witness to art can be a very healing process. I'm curious if you can comment your thoughts on art as a healing process from sickness, because I know that in our history as a modern culture, and even like a pre-modern culture, a lot of the art that we have, that we really put on a pedestal, is art that is the artifact of deep suffering and illness of our artists that ultimately takes their lives in the end. How do you feel about what are your kind of thoughts around that? And do you feel like there's a shifting in the mentality behind art in our modern culture thanks to the visionary experience?
You mean in the mainstream art world?
I guess it's kind of difficult because this whole topic is something that's like unfamiliar for me. So I'm almost like reaching to you to sort of like navigate me into the world of art. So yes, I mean, contemporary or like mainstream art world, or even sort of like the underground art worlds as well. Just your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think it's difficult because each artist is doing that in completely his own way. And I see in the art world today that there are not really movements or anything anymore. It's more like you have to think about something new and something authentic that we haven't seen quite before. And it's not all. It's a lot about the idea and the concept, and that's also a big part of the art school I was studying in. That the idea and the concept, that's almost the most important thing. And I don't always agree with that, but. Yeah, it's difficult to say because the art world today, it's a bit like a game, and it's a bit like it tries to fool itself all the time. It's like, can this be art? Can this be art? Oh, can this also be art? You know? It's a bit like that game is going on, and it's a very language-based game, which is very, very interesting in a way. But for me, it's about the experience. If an artwork is triggering an experience for me, then I'm interested and I'm willing to take the time to experience it. But there's a lot of art that I just skip because you have to really read into what is a specific artist doing and what is it about, and it's very language based. A lot of the art is, but luckily there are also a lot of artists who are creating cool experiences and uplifting experiences.
You mean in the engagement of the art as it stands for itself? Like it's uplifting and engaging and interesting without needing to take time to read about all the reasons why it's interesting?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can definitely see how this perspective that you have would naturally lead you into creating virtual reality as an art form, because it really is putting another person in a totally altered state of consciousness and shifting them into another reality, because their whole visual field becomes immersed. It's not just bearing witness to one thing, but it's actually being in an entirely different visual reality. What was it that really sparked your interest in VR specifically and led you to focusing on this as one of your art forms?
Yeah, well, I realized that what I was trying to do with painting is creating convincing illusions by using perspective drawing, for example, or different contrasts and colors to create a believable space. And when I saw virtual reality coming up, I was just immediately like, whoa, this is really a dream come true, you know? You can then really create a world and immerse yourself in that world, like completely. It becomes a reality on its own, like entering into a painting. And that's actually one of the projects I also did. It's about the crossover from painting into a virtual reality environment. So I basically made a painting, and I put a viewer in front of the painting wearing goggles. And on front of the goggles were 2 webcams. So in the beginning, he was looking at the painting, sitting in front of it. But slowly he would find himself in a pre-constructed virtual world where he was also looking at the painting, but then slowly moving into it. And like literally entering the painting. So in the beginning, I was really interested in creating these transitions from going through the real world into a virtual world, and then you're back in the real world, and playing with these transition points, which I found really interesting. And because I found that when you put on the goggles, then it's too abrupt, you know. You don't have a time to integrate the transition point. So I played around with the webcams and the feedback for that. So I did several projects doing that technique.
Mm-hmm. I noticed those videos on your website of like the subjective and the objective view of people going through the process of having their baseline reality slowly augmented into a totally altered digital space.
Yeah.
And so what was next for you from there?
Well, you mentioned this project I'm working on now. It's called Australium. And that's kind of my next project I'm working on. And it's basically a Zen garden. A kind of, I wanted to create a healing space in VR. So you can experience different states of consciousness and different healing experiences. And also, it's about a journey. Because I'm really fascinated about building with light structures. Because you're literally building with light with those programs. You're looking at light. And for me, that also is resembling the closest thing about a visionary state, because you can really enter these realms of light. And the subject of light has very healing experience for me, and also resembles your higher self or your higher creative potential. And I think that can really be beneficial if you're journeying through those places. And I'm really interested in atmosphere of those places, creating several colors and light structures. And it's a bit like building architecture, you know. If you're in a very large concrete building with office blocks, it does something differently than when you're walking into a cathedral, you know. And that's something I found really interesting, because you can, when you immerse yourself in this world of light, you have this a different feeling than because it becomes your surrounding. And I think the surrounding you're immersed in is very important. So I kind of play with that. I'm in the playing phase now, the sandbox phase. What can I do with this new technology? And there are also a lot of things that are difficult. For example, the processing power of the computers is something that has to improve. The resolution of the displays has to improve. But it's fun, and it's very. I'm very excited where this is going, this technology. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for people just listening or maybe watching this on YouTube, hearing you talk about it is very inspiring. But I think it's kind of hard to conceptualize what it is that you're actually making, and so there are videos on your website that show this other reality of light that you create. And even just for me, even just watching them on my computer screen, I was like, whoa. I mean, I'm also like, I tend to go all like goofy over any like highly psychedelic visionary-esque aesthetic, but it was like dropping into an altered state simply watching it on my computer screen. And I can only imagine what it would be like to be immersed in what feels like a grand space, because I've had the opportunity to be in VR with something sort of similar to what you're talking about. At least the intention was kind of similar. Mm-hmm. The visual aesthetic was very different. But it really felt like it was an open space above me, where when I'm watching it on the computer screen, it's really cool, but it's still a two-dimensional space that I'm kind of interpreting slightly three-dimensionally, because I know that it's 3D, but it's not like VR 3D. So I can only imagine what it will, and I hope to one day, if I'm back in the Netherlands, get an opportunity to actually try this out. And you use the Oculus Rift, is that right?
Right now I have the latest consumer version of the Oculus Rift. Yeah.
Great. And some of your other projects, I believe one that's on your website when you first open it up, takes this healing experience to another level, and it includes live music. Can you talk about this project a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's actually my latest project I did with VR. The project is called Raga Chromesthesia, and Chromesthesia is a form of synesthesia, in which you experience sounds or colors and shapes with sounds. And I myself am really sensitive to this. When I'm listening to a concert, for example, and I have my eyes closed, then I'm experiencing this phenomena. And it actually started when I was visiting a friend, and we were doing mushrooms, and we were actually listening to Ravi Shankar. I don't know if you know him, the sitar virtuoso. And I was like, hey, this is not only about music, because all these shapes and patterns and architecture came into my third eye vision. And I was like, hey, this guy is actually building temples, He's not making music, he's also building temples. And I found it really inspiring to have sound as a creative element, and I wanted to do something with that in VR. So letting the sound be a guiding element in a journey you're taking. So I started playing with that and looking at what the possibilities would be, and I couldn't get to a point that the music was really building the shapes, but I could get to a point that the music is influencing the shapes. So I could let the music change the shapes of my models and also the colors. And I found a nice tool that let me create all these nice mandalas that are constantly merging and transforming out of the music. So yeah, it's the same. You have to see it to really because it's very visually based. And, yeah.
Well, I'll see if with your permission, I'll try to patch in some of the video off your website into the video for this on YouTube, so people can get little tasters of what it looks like as you're talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
So I'm really on board with this utilization of virtual reality technology to create healing spaces, altered spaces, even if it's not necessarily healing, but for intrigue and curiosity and to be enthused by an altered state. Though that's not the full and complete. That's not the only mentality that's going beyond. Oh my goodness! It's not the only mentality that is emerging in our current relationship to VR, and obviously gaming companies are getting really deep into this. Facebook is into it, which is, I can only imagine how problematic that's going to be for the what did you say, like corporate or profiteering intent behind the symbols created in our visual experiences within life. But what I'm thinking of right now in particular is utilizing this technology for games that are focused in violence or horror-related games. So I'm thinking of this, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but this episode of a show called Black Mirror, where this guy is given the ultimate horror VR experience and ends up dying and totally losing his mind. And it's... How do you feel about the possibility of almost like the antithesis to where you see VR as going as a healing art, but going into it as producing an art of fear and terror and even violence in regards to war games and stuff?
Yeah, I think you're right. The technology in itself, it's a technology, so it's neutral. You can go both ways with it. But I think the fear is about commercials that are putting into our content. But I don't know if it's really a problem, because I also played some horror games on the Oculus Rift, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because it can also make you stronger, I think, right? Because you're also writing in your book, embracing the shadow is also a part of the psychedelic experience. There are also dark aspects to it. So I think it can make you stronger, but I think the real danger is in the addictive quality of the experience, that people are going to be lost in these shooters or online worlds that are not really helping them in their development as a human. So I think there's a danger there, but there is already a danger there with our current media technology. So, but it could magnify that, definitely, I think. But another interesting part about you mentioned Facebook, for example, getting really involved in this as well, is that we find different ways of communicating with each other through these media, and develop more intimate way of sharing experiences, for example. For example, I tried this one demo that's out now. It's called V-Time. And you're basically sitting, you're getting an avatar, and you're sitting with a group of people. And you can talk with each other just by microphone. And it's basically a chat program, but it's a completely different experience when you're having this virtual body and you can actually look each other at the face and speak to each other in that way. So I think it's for communicating and finding new ways of communication. This is also going to be a really interesting area. And I think it becomes even more interesting when you consider that you're not limited to having this one virtual body. You can be very flexible. You can also be a energy field, for example, of colors and particles. And to take it a step further, if we can attach certain sensors, brain sensors, for example, EEGs, to measure our emotional states, for example, that are linked to this appearance we have in the virtual world. So we can look at each other and get information about someone's feelings. Or we could use that also to create environments and change the shape we have. I think that's also a very interesting aspect, which also McKenna pointed out, because he was sometimes speaking about VR, not very in depth, but he had some really cool ideas that definitely inspired me as well.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Terrence McKenna was talking about VR in the 90s, right before when VR meant this like this clunky looking avatar thing that was just like your visual representation in a chat room, right? So, yeah, it's interesting, this idea. Just like a quick note on Terrence McKenna, which is that he sort of became the very thing that he talked about. Like living his consciousness, living on like in the digital realm, because he exists, like hundreds of hours or something of him talking on the internet, which is like, at what point would we be able to then go into VR and have a direct conversation with Terrence McKenna based on like algorithmic interpretations of what he might say on certain topics based on what he has said on other topics. And even as you're talking about this meeting each other as like moving entities of light and geometry influenced by our emotional states in another dimension, it's like I can feel the romance sort of calling me in, and it's like, whoa, slow down. It just feels very exciting, and I could see how quickly we might lose ourselves in that. I'm curious what your thoughts are, as sort of one of the art pioneers of this new movement, what your thoughts are on what might be our sense of identity in a future where we are also beings of light. Like we actually identify at times as beings of light. Because I'm thinking right now, I know that I identify as who I am, but then I also have this weird construct based on how I present myself online. Like I've got my, who I really am, and then I've got my interpretations of who I am, and then I have how my ego relates to the combination between those interpretations and that authenticity. And then I have this other dynamic, which is my digital ego, and how I'm perceived online, how I engage online, how I construct myself online, which is, as much as I try to be as authentic as I can, it's still calculated and formulated, and I live a significant aspect of my awareness every day into this online world. So I'm curious what your thoughts are around the identity that we might begin to form based in the type of future of VR that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's gonna be more and more transparent. So, and I think you also having a choice of what you want to show from yourself and what not. At least I hope that's gonna be the case. But I think it's also a beautiful thing that we can become these beings of light that have nothing to hide. That you can really look at the person really as it is, without having to looking at a mask or having to look at yeah, it's difficult to say. I don't have a clear view about that yet. I think it's something that has to emerge. But I think that we can, because we are starting to create our own avatars and how we want to look in that space as well. So it depends on the person. But my hope is that this will let grow our creativity, our creative potential, that we are creators of these virtual spaces and not only consumers. I think that's a very important thing. And that we can create in a very direct way and share that with each other as well. So I hope it's going to be a bit of a playground or a sandbox that is very easily accessible.
Mm-hmm. And definitely one that will have probably a trial and error phase that hurts ourselves a little bit, as our innocence is horrendously corrupted by the larger bodies, clandestine bodies at work. That, you know, this sense of being in transparency with another in a digital space is really beautiful, but we have come to see what happens when we're truly what happens when a lot of personal data and transparency is put out on the internet, and how government surveillance, corporations, how they engage that, and the way that they use that is, I mean, not necessarily to the benefit of our open vulnerability. And then there's also the question of all this other stuff that comes in, like identity theft and like account hacking and you know, like extortion and blackmail and this kind of stuff. It's in a way, I'm thinking about like the Wild West, and there's a lot to be forged and a lot to be built. I know for myself, when you mentioned the EEG, talked about being builders, it reminded me of this sort of like little fantasy I've had in my mind that I know for myself, I'm never going to do this. It's like so far from my place that I could build something like this, but I want it to happen. So it's like I release it offwards into the morphogenetic field. Like somebody else will create this if I don't hold on to the idea too long. And it's being in a virtual reality space hooked up to EEGs and having direct visual and audio feedback based on your EEG. And so you change your state like watching the shapes and colors and the sounds moving, and you can change your state of mind, play, you know, like those Star Wars force trainers or whatever, you put on the little EEG and you have to try to like breathe and meditate to levitate the ball, except you're building three-dimensional spaces. You're building these spaces that you're building, you know, in preparation on the computer and stuff, but you're building it in real time with your mind. And the intensity can be grown over time. Like the gain can get turned up, and it could go from like 2D to 3D to 3D plus color to 3D plus color plus sound, and eventually get to a place where you could give other people these the goggles, and you can all sit together while somebody like sits in one space in the room and builds these cathedrals of light with their mind for everyone to participate in. And it like it really excites me, actually. It makes me really happy to think that one day I might experience something like that.
That's basically an ayahuasca session without
Isn't
ayahuasca.
It? Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah, digital ayahuasca.
I was thinking about that as well. Yeah, but I think because what we are now is what the technology that we have now is always you have to import a model of some sort. And I think when it becomes more interesting is when you can generate the shape of the models, so that they don't have to be pre-programmed, so to say. So what I would really like to see is that you can you don't have to pre-program it, but that there are some parameters that you can throw in there. And if you change those parameters by, for example, the feedback of an EEG, you can, in a more direct way, create these environments. And I think 3D fractals would be perfect for this.
Mm-hmm.
But only they are too complex to render real time yet. But I think in the future we can get there, definitely.
And maybe not too long in the future either, with the progression of digital technology, especially for video rendering. I mean, we're already in the era of, you know, consumer priced 4K like TVs and 4K on our phones, and so it's like I don't think we're too far away. It's all about which company happens to feel like they can corner the market and make the most money off it first, and then develop it to bring to the consumer for us to play with. Unfortunately.
It's tricky when it comes to, because Oculus is getting a pretty big company now. And what I see happening is that at first it was like really a tiny group of enthusiasts and developers getting stuff together and sharing their experiences on forums and that kind of stuff. But what I see now is that they have this Oculus store, and that when you want to have your app in this store, it has to go through all these it has to fulfill all these options that it has to before you can place it in the store. So it's less open, and it's more of a closed system now. And that's what I think is a bit of the downside of getting closer to consumer released products.
Yeah, though if the history of consumer like gaming and entertainment technology has taught us anything, it's that within a couple weeks of it being released to the market, how to hack that to your own to your own needs will be readily available. Yeah. And it won't take. I imagine it wouldn't take long for open source options to emerge.
Right. Yeah. And there are going to be smaller companies that would bring out their own glasses that are more open source based.
Mm-hmm.
I already saw some of those projects emerging. So
yeah, I'm just actually thinking about, I think it's called Magic Leaf or Magic Leap or something, and it's like a augmented reality technology that's getting a lot of funding, but isn't very very few people have actually seen it, and they use like the same premise of like Google Glass and whatever, but the thing that makes it different is that instead of projecting an image into the space, they project light frequencies directly into your eyes that cause the brain to render that image in space, which is like
I don't know how to do it though, but it sounds pretty far out. But if it works, then that will be really cool.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's very exciting territory. Sander, it's been really great to talk to you here on the show today. Is there anything that you'd like to leave with the audience? Perhaps your URL where they can hear more about your art, either see it in person or just check it out online?
Yeah, well, I have a website. It's www.sander and then a stripe in the middle, and then Bos, BOS.nl. And that's my website, and all my art is on there, and videos of my projects I'm doing, and you can follow me there. So
great.
See you in virtual space.
Great. I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes for the show, and which is where people can see the videos that I'm going to retroactively insert into this conversation earlier on. Yeah, that's it. You have a Facebook or a Twitter or anything like that, or just your website?
Yeah, I have also Facebook. Yeah.
Great.
If you just type in my name, then you will find me.
Great. So, I'll make sure that's linked in the bio too. Sander, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you too, James. It was fun talking with you.
Cool. Take care.
You too.
I really appreciated getting juicy with the whole where can the technology of virtual reality go, and the psychedelic minds and visionary artists start to tap in and modify it for their own somewhat hedonistic, possibly altruistic intentions to really expand the consciousness of people here on this planet. And Sander was a great person to get into that juicy topic with. If you enjoyed the juicy topic of virtual reality and the visionary art world, please take a moment to head over to iTunes and leave a positive comment or review. You could also hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at James W. Jesso. And of course, this podcast is brought to you by you. So thank you so much for taking the time to head over to Patreon to check me out and help fund the show. You can get more details about becoming a supporter of the show at jameswjesso.com/support. And of course, all of those links are included in the show notes, which are also at jameswjesso.com. If you're watching the YouTube video, it's right below. So that's it for this episode of ATTMind Radio. Thank you again for listening. I will see you on the full moon of May 2017.